All right, so this is the beginning of To Kill a Mockingbird. This is the screenplay version. And as we're reading, you're going to see italicized text just like this. And these are the stage directions, which are not said out loud. They just tell the actors what to do or they narrate the setting. And one other thing is you'll see a character named Jean Louise. And Jean Louise is the adult version of Scout. So Jean Louise is a grown-up who is the narrator of the story, and when she goes back into time to the 1930s where the story takes place, we see her as a little kid, and her name is Scout. Okay. Okay. It takes place in Macomb, Alabama. Starts at daybreak. It is just before dawn, and the half-light cotton farms, pine woods, the hills surrounding Macomb, and the courthouse square are seen. A young woman's voice is heard. Jean Louise says, as a narrator, Macomb was a tired old town, even in 1932, when I first knew it. Somehow, it was hotter then. Men's stiff collars wilted by 9 in the morning. Ladies bathed before noon and after their 3 o'clock naps. And by nightfall, they were like soft tea cakes with frosting from sweating and sweet talcum. The day was 24 hours long, but it seemed longer. There's no hurry, for there's nowhere to go and nothing to buy, and no money to buy it with. Although Macomb County had recently been told they had nothing to fear but fear itself. The Finch house and yard are seen. It is a small frame house built high off the ground and with a porch in the manner of southern cottages of its day. The yard is a large one filled with oaks and has an air of mystery about it in the early morning light. That summer, I was 6 years old. So now we're going back in time and the story begins when Scout is 6 years old. Walter Cunningham, a thin-boned farmer in his late 50s, comes into view. He is carrying a croaker sack full of hickory nuts. He passes under the oak tree at the side of the house. Scout, who is 6, dressed in blue jeans, drops from one of its branches to the ground. She brushes herself off and goes toward Mr. Cunningham. Good morning, Mr. Cunningham. Cunningham says, Morning, miss. Scout says, My daddy's getting dressed. Would you like me to call him for you? No, miss, I don't care to bother. Scout says, Well, it ain't no bother, Mr. Cunningham. He'll be happy to see you. Atticus! Scout hurries up the steps and opens the door. Atticus! Here's Mr. Cunningham. Scout steps back onto the porch as Atticus enters. Walter Cunningham seems ill at ease and embarrassed. Atticus says, Good morning, Walter. Good morning, Miss Finch. I didn't want to bother you none. I brung you these hickory nuts as part of my entailment. Atticus reaches for the sack of nuts. Well, I thank you. The collards we had last week were delicious. Cunningham, gesturing and then turning to leave, says, Well, good morning. And Atticus says, Good morning, Walter. Atticus holds the sack of nuts. Scout is on the steps behind him. Scout leans on Atticus's shoulder as they watch Mr. Cunningham leave. Atticus says, Scout, I think maybe next time Mr. Cunningham comes, you better not call me. Scout says, Well, I thought you'd want to thank him. Oh, I do, Atticus said, but I think it embarrasses him to be thanked. Atticus turns and puts the sack on the porch and starts up for the front yard to get the morning papers. Scout follows after him. Scout says, Well, why does he bring you all this stuff? And Atticus says he's paying me for some legal work I did for him. So right off the bat, we find out that Atticus is a lawyer. And Cunningham is paying him back for some sort of lawyering he did for him. Scout says, Well, why is he paying you like this? And Atticus says, That's the only way he can. He has no money. Atticus comes back to the porch as Scout follows. He picks up the newspaper and reads. Scout says, Is he poor? Yes. Are we poor? We are indeed, Atticus said. Are we as poor as the Cunninghams? No, not exactly, Atticus said. The Cunninghams are country folks, farmers, and the crash hit them the hardest. Calpurnia, in her late 50s, appears at the screen door. Calpurnia says, Scout, call your brother. And she goes back inside. Scout says, Atticus, Jem is up in the tree. He says he won't come down until you agree to play football for the Methodists. Atticus walks toward the tree. In a treehouse high up on the tree sits Jem. He is 10, with a serious, manly little face. Right now, he is scowling. Atticus says, Jem, son, why don't you come on down and have your breakfast? Calpurnia has a good one. Hot pockets. No, sir, Jem says. Not until you agree to play football for the Methodists. Atticus is looking up at Jem. Scout is swinging in the tire swing. And Atticus says, Oh no, son, I can't do that. I explained to you. I'm too old to get out there. After all, I'm the only father you have. You wouldn't want me to get out there and get my head knocked off, would you? Jem says, I ain't coming down. Atticus says, Suit yourself. And he turns and starts for the kitchen door as he reads the newspaper. Jem moves out from behind the covering and watches. Scout starts to go across the street, and stops by the tree. Miss Maudie Atkinson, a strong, warm-hearted woman, keenly interested in Atticus and the children, is working on her flowers in her yard across the street. So the first time we see Miss Maudie, she is working on her flowers, so we know off the bat that's an important thing to her. Maudie says, Good morning. Scout says, Good morning, Miss Maudie. Well, what's going on over there? Scout says, I'm having a terrible time, Miss Maudie. Jem is staying up in that tree until Atticus agrees to play football for the Methodists, and Atticus says he's too old. Jem says, Every time I want him to do something, he's too old. He's too old for anything. Maudie says, He can do plenty of things. Atticus, entering the yard from the house and walks over, says, You be good, children, and mind Cal. Good morning, Maudie. Maudie says, Good morning, Atticus, and the church bells ring. And we see that Cal is that earlier character Calpurnia, who's the only African-American character that we are going to meet for a little bit. Jem says, He won't let me have a gun. He'll only play touch football with me, never tackle. Maudie, glancing in Atticus' direction, then looks at Jem. He can make somebody's will so airtight you can't break it. You count your blessings and stop complaining, both of you. So while the kids think that Atticus is old and kind of useless, Maudie shares that he is an amazing lawyer. Atticus continues on out the yard. Miss Maudie walks away. Scout climbs up into the tree. And Scout says, Jem, he is pretty old. And Jem says, I can't help that. And then he swings down to the lower limb in disgust and looks down into Miss Stephanie Crawford's collard patch next door. A boy, Dill, is sitting among the collards. Sitting down, he is not much higher than the collards. He has a solemn, owlish face, a knowledge and imagination too old for his years. He looks up at Jem. Dill says, Hey. Jem responds, Hey yourself. Dill says, I'm Charles Baker Harris. I can read. You got anything that needs reading, I can do it. So we see that Dill's real name is Charles Baker Harris. Jem asks, How old are you, 4.5? Dill says, Nah, going on 7. Well, no wonder then, Jem says. Scout's been reading since she was born and don't start to school till next month. You look right puny for going on 7. And Dill responds, I'm little, but I'm old. Folks call me Dill. I'm from Meridian, Mississippi, and I'm spending 2 weeks next door with my Aunt Stephanie. My mama works for a photographer in Meridian. She entered my picture in the Beautiful Child contest and won $5. She gave the money to me, and I went to the picture show 20 times with it. And so we've got this kid who looks kind of small and a little bit weird looking, and he says he won the Beautiful Child contest. We are going to see that Dill likes to exaggerate quite a bit, not necessarily tell the truth. Scout and Jem climb down from the treehouse. Scout climbs into the tire swing as Jem leans across the tree facing Dill. Scout says, Our mama's dead, but we got a daddy. Where's your daddy? And Dill says, I haven't got one. Well, is he dead? No. Well, Scout says, if he's not dead, you've got one, haven't you? And Jem turns to Scout and says, Hush, Scout. Jem motions to her with his head as Scout whispers. What happened? What's up? Calpurnia enters with a shirt and starts to dress Scout. Dill, this is Calpurnia. Calpurnia says, Pleased to know you, Dill. Pleased to know you, Dill responds. My daddy owns the L&N Railroad. He's going to let me run the engine all the way to New Orleans. Is that so? Calpurnia says, and then she exits. Jem turns away. Scout finishes putting on her shirt. He says I can invite anybody. Shh! Jem says. Mr. Radley, in his 70s, a regal, austere man walks by. Scout and Jem see him and become very subdued, as if they were afraid. Their attention leaves Dill, and he senses this, and he looks at them to see what's happening. And Jem says about Mr. Radley, he says, "There goes the meanest man that ever took a breath of life." And Dill asks, "Why is he the meanest man?" "Well, for one," Jem says, "he has a boy named Boo that he keeps chained to a bed in that house over yonder." And he points to the house. "See? He lives over there." As they start to move out the yard, Scout follows behind them. They go down the sidewalk, past Miss Stephanie's house, north to the Radley house. So all these people live on the same street. Jem says, "Boo only comes out at night when we're asleep and it's pitch dark. When you wake up at night, you can hear him. Once I heard him scratching on our screen door, but he was gone by the time Atticus got there." They are standing by a light pole now, staring at the Radley house and yard. The house is low and was once white with a deep front porch and green shutters. It darkened long ago to the color of the slate gray yard around it. Rain-spotted shingles droop over the eaves of the veranda. Oak trees keep the sun away. The remains of a picket fence drunkenly guard a front yard, a swept yard that is never swept, where Johnson grass and rabbit tobacco grow in abundance. So this house was once very nice looking, and now it's old and gray and not taken care of. Dill's eyes have widened. He is becoming truly intrigued. Dill asks, "Well, wonder what he does in there." And Scout asks, "I wonder what he looks like." Jem says, "Well, judging from his tracks, he's about 6.5 feet tall. He eats raw squirrels and all the cats he can catch. There's a long, jagged scar running all the way across his face. His teeth are yellow and rotten. His eyes are popped, and he drools most of the time." Dill says, "Oh, I don't believe you." Miss Stephanie, Dill's aunt, comes up behind him. She's in her late 50s, a spinster and the neighborhood gossip. She comes up without their hearing her. She has a habit of half shouting when she talks. Stephanie says, "Dill, what are you doing here?" Dill says, "My Lord, Aunt Stephanie, you almost gave me a heart attack." Stephanie says, "Dill, I don't want you playing around that house over there. There's a maniac living there, and he's dangerous." "See," Jem says, "I was just trying to warn him about Boo, and he wouldn't believe me." Stephanie says, "Well, you just better believe him, Mr. Dill Harris. Tell him about the time Boo tried to kill his papa." Stephanie says, "Well, I was standing in my yard one day when his mama come out yelling, 'He's killing us all.' Turned out that Boo was just sitting in his living room, cutting up the paper for a scrapbook, and when his daddy come by, he reached over with his scissors, stabbed him in the leg, pulled him out, and then went right on back to cutting the paper." Dill's eyes were popping with excitement. They wanted to send him to an asylum, but his daddy said no Radley was going to any asylum, so they locked him up in the basement of the courthouse till he nearly died of the damp, and his daddy brought him home. And there he is to this day, sitting over there with his scissors. Lord knows what he's doing or thinking. Later on that day, Jem is swinging the tire swing. In the distance, the town clock is heard to strike 5. Jem says, "Come on, Scout, it's 5 o'clock." And he jumps from the swinging tire and starts to run out the yard. Dill says, "Where you going?" And Scout says, "It's time to meet Atticus," and she runs after Jem. Dill follows her, and they run down the street. Dill asks, "Why do you call your daddy Atticus?" Scout says, "'Cause Jem does." "Well, why does he?" "I don't know. He just started to when he began talking." They run up the street toward town. Jem slows down, and he says, "Mr. Bose is on her porch." He gestures to Dill. "Listen, no matter what she says to you, don't answer her back. There's a Confederate pistol in her lap under her shawl, and she'll kill you quick as look at you. Come on." They walk cautiously on and start to pass the DeBose house. Beside her is a Negro girl, Jessie, who takes care of her. Scout says, "Hey, Mr. Bose." Mr. Bose, snarling at the children, says, "Don't you say hey to me, you ugly girl. You say good afternoon to me. You come over here when I'm talking to you." Scout, Jem, and Dill keep on going. They are made very uncomfortable by her. They see Atticus coming and they run toward him. Jem says, "Atticus, this is Dill. He's Miss Stephanie's nephew." Atticus says, "Well, how do you do, Dill?" Mr. Bose says, "Listen to me when I'm talking to you." Don't your daddy teach you to respect old people? You come back here, Jean Louise Finch. Atticus takes the children and walks over to the porch, excuse me. Good afternoon, Mr. Bowes. My, you look like a picture this afternoon. The children are trying to hide behind Atticus. They are so scared of Mr. Bowes. They begin to giggle nervously at each other. Scout whispers, he don't say a picture or what? Atticus turns to look at the yard. My goodness gracious, look at your flowers. Did you ever see anything so beautiful? He gestures with his hand held in out. Mr. Bowes, the gardens of Bellingrath have nothing to compare with your flowers. Mr. Bowes says, oh, I don't think they're as nice as last year. Atticus says, oh, I can't agree with you. Jem whispers, he gets her interested in something nice, and she forgets to be mean. The three children are standing behind Atticus, and Atticus hits Jem with his hat. Atticus says, I think that your yard is going to be the showplace of the town. Children giggle. Well, grand seeing you, Mr. Bowes. He puts on his hat and they start on. Scout's room at night. So we see from that interaction that even though someone might be mean, Atticus is always going to be gentlemanly and teach his kids to act the right way through his own actions. Scout's room at night. She is undressed and in bed. Atticus is seated on the bed. Scout is reading to him from Robinson Crusoe. Scout reads, I had 2 cats which I brought ashore on my first raft, and I had a dog, and she holds the book to her face and looks at Atticus. Atticus, do you think Boo Radley ever comes and looks at my window at night? Jem says he does. This afternoon when we were over by their house, and Atticus interrupts Scout, I told you and Jem to leave those poor people alone. I want you to stay away from their house and stop tormenting them. Scout says, yes, sir. Atticus looks back at his watch, or looks at his pocket watch, excuse me. Well, I think that's all the reading for tonight, honey. It's getting late. She closes the book, and he sits up and takes the book and puts it on the table. Scout asks, what time is it? 8:30. Scout says, may I see your watch? And he gives it to her. She opens the case and reads the inscription. It says, to Atticus, my beloved husband. Atticus, Jem says this watch is going to belong to him someday. Atticus says, that's right. Well, why? Well, Atticus says, it's customary for the boy to have his father's watch. Well, what are you going to give me? Atticus says, well, I don't know that I have much else of value that belongs to me. But there's a pearl necklace, and there's a ring that belonged to your mother, and I put them away, and they're to be yours. Scout stretches her arms and smiles. Atticus kisses her cheek. He takes his watch and gets up. He covers her and puts out the lamp. Good night, Scout. And Scout says good night. Atticus calls, good night, Jem. And from his room, Jem says good night. Atticus leaves. Jem's room at night, or right afterwards, Jem pulls the cover over himself in the darkness. Scout lies in her bed thinking, and Scout asks, Jem? Yes? How old was I when Mama died? 2, Jem answers. And how old were you? 6. As old as I am now? Uh-huh. Was Mama pretty? Uh-huh. And we see that Atticus is on the front porch, and he can hear the children's conversation. Scout continues. Was Mama nice? Uh-huh. Did you love her? Yes, Jem answers. Did I love her? Yes. Do you miss her? Uh-huh. And there is silence. Atticus listens to the night sounds. Judge Taylor, 75, comes up on the porch. Judge says, evening, Atticus. Evening, Judge. The judge walks over to him and pulls up a chair as he starts to sit. Atticus says, rather warm, isn't it? Judge answers, yes, indeed, and he fans himself with his hat. How's Miss Taylor? She's fine, thank you. Atticus, you heard about Tom Robinson? Yes, sir, Atticus says. The grand jury will get around to charging him tomorrow. I was thinking about appointing you to take the case, though I realize you're very busy these days with your practice, and your children need a great deal of your time. Atticus says, yes, sir, I'll take the case. Judge says, I'll send a boy for you tomorrow when his hearing comes up. Judge rises. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, Atticus. Yes, sir. The judge says, and thank you. Yes, sir. Judge Taylor leaves again. Judge Taylor leaves. Again, there is silence. Atticus rocks and listens to the night sounds. So we just found out there's some sort of court case involving a man named Tom Robinson that Atticus has agreed to take on. And we will find more about that as we continue to read To Kill a Mockingbird.